An Apparition by Guy de Maupassant. We'd been talking about sequestration in connection with a recent lawsuit. It was towards the end of an evening spent among friends at an old house in the Rue de Grenelle, and every one of us had told a story supposed to be true. Eventually, the aegis Marquis de la Tour Samuel, who was 82, got to his feet and, leaning against the mantelpiece, said, in a rather tremulous voice, I too have experienced something strange. So strange, in fact, that I have been haunted by it all my life. It is more than half a century since the incident happened, but not a month has passed without my seeing it all again in a dream. The impression, the imprint of terror, if you can follow me, has stayed with me ever since that day. For 10 minutes I underwent such a ghastly fright that ever since a kind of perpetual fear has remained in my soul. Unexpected noises make me tremble to the bottom of my heart, and things obscurely seen in the darkness almost impel me irresistibly to flee. In brief, at night I am afraid. I wouldn't have confessed to that when I was younger, but now I can say anything. At 82, I don't feel obliged to be courageous in the presence of imaginary dangers. I've never given way before any real danger. But the affair disturbed me so utterly and caused me such profound, mysterious, and awful distress that I never mentioned it to anyone. I have suppressed it in the depths of my being, those depths in which tormented secrets are hidden, the secrets and frailties we are ashamed of. I shall tell it to you precisely as it happened, without any attempt at explanation. Undoubtedly it can be explained, unless I were mad at the time. But I wasn't mad, and I will prove it. You are at liberty to think what you choose, but these are the plain facts. It was in the year 1827, in July. I was stationed at Rouen. One day, as I was strolling along the quay, I came across a man whom I thought I knew. Without being able to remember exactly who he was, impulsively I made as if to stop. The stranger noticed this, glanced at me, and embraced me. He was a friend of my youth, whom I had liked immensely. It was 5 years since I had set eyes on him, and he seemed to be 50 years older. His hair was completely white, and he moved with a stoop as if utterly worn out. He saw my astonishment and told me what had happened to shatter his life. He had fallen desperately in love with a young girl and had married her, but after a single year of supreme love and happiness she had died suddenly of heart trouble, perhaps of love. On the day she was buried, he abandoned his chateau and went to live in his house in Rouen. There he existed, desperate and lonely, eaten up by grief, and so unhappy that he contemplated suicide. Now that I have met you again, he said, I shall ask you to do me an important favor, to go to my former home and obtain for me from the bureau in my bedroom, our bedroom, certain documents which I urgently require. I can't send a servant or even a lawyer, as utter discretion and complete secrecy are needed. For my own part, nothing on earth would persuade me to go into that house again. I will give you the key of the room, which I myself locked on departing, and the key of the bureau and Also a note to my gardener instructing him to open up the chateau for you. But come and have breakfast with me tomorrow morning, and we will arrange everything." I agreed to do him this small favour. It wouldn't be much of a trip, for his property was only a few miles out of Rouen and could easily be reached in an hour by horse. So at 10 o'clock next day I went round to his house, and we had breakfast together. Yet he hardly spoke a word. He asked me to forgive him, but the idea of the visit I was going to make to the bedroom in the chateau, the scene of his past happiness, overwhelmed him. Certainly he was strangely disturbed and preoccupied, as if some unknown conflict were going on in his soul. Eventually he told me in detail what I must do. It was quite simple. I was to obtain 2 bundles of letters and a roll of documents from the first drawer on the right-hand side of the bureau, to which I had the key. He added, "I do not need to request you not to look at them." I was offended by that, and told him so in no uncertain manner. "Do forgive me. I am suffering so much," he said brokenly, and began to weep. At about 1 o'clock I left him and set off on my mission. The weather was splendid, and I rode across the fields listening to the larks singing and to the rhythmical tapping of my sword against my boot. Presently I came to the forest and walked my horse. Branches of trees brushed my face as I rode, and every now and then I caught a leaf in my teeth and chewed it eagerly, for the sheer joy of being alive that sometimes fills one with intense happiness. As I drew near the chateau, I took the letter for the gardener out of my pocket to have a look at it, and was surprised to find it was sealed. I was so astonished and vexed by this that I was on the point of returning without having carried out my promise, but decided this would show too much sensitiveness. Quite possibly my friend had sealed the envelope unthinkingly. He had been so upset. The chateau had the appearance of having been neglected for a score of years. The gate was open wide, and so derelict it was a wonder it was still hanging. The paths were smothered in weeds, and the flower beds and the lawn were all one. My loud knocking aroused the old man, who emerged from a side door. He seemed bewildered with astonishment at my visit. He read the letter I gave him, examined it again and again, surveyed me suspiciously, put the letter in a pocket, and eventually demanded, "Well, then, what do you want?" "As you have only just read your master's instructions, you should know what I want. I wish to enter the chateau." He was flabbergasted. "You mean you propose to go into her room?" I was beginning to lose patience. "Look here, are you going to stand there cross-questioning me?" "No, monsieur," he said in confusion. It's only because the room hasn't been opened since she died. If you don't mind waiting for a few minutes, I'll go myself to see if—" I interrupted him angrily. "Look, what are you talking about? You can't get into the room, as I have the key." "All right, monsieur, I will show you the way," was all that he could say at that. "Just show me the staircase and then leave me. I will find the way without you." "But, monsieur—" I was really angry by now. "Shut up, or I'll give you something to think about." I brushed past him and entered the chateau. I made my way first through the kitchen, then a couple of rooms occupied by the caretaker and his wife, next through a spacious hall by which I came to the staircase. I went up the stairs and soon recognized the door described by my friend. I opened it without difficulty and went in. The room was so dark that to begin with I couldn't make out a thing. I came to a halt my nostrils assailed by the unpleasant, mouldering smell of untenanted rooms, of dead rooms. Presently, as my eyes grew used to the darkness, I could see quite clearly a large, untidy bedroom, the bed covered only by mattress and pillows, on one of which was the obvious impression of an arm or a head, as if somebody had been resting there recently. The chairs were all out of place. I noticed that a door, probably leading to an anteroom, had been left half open. I went straight to the window, which I opened to let in the daylight, but the clasps of the shutters had become so rusty I couldn't make them budge. I even attempted to break them with my sword, but I couldn't. As I was becoming vexed by my unavailing efforts, and anyhow could see quite well in the gloom, I gave up the idea of obtaining more light and went across to the bureau. I sat down in a chair, undid the lid of the bureau, and opened the drawer in question. It was crammed full. I required only 3 bundles of papers, which I knew how to identify, and started to look for them. I was peering closely in an attempt to make out the writing on them, when I seemed to feel, something rustling behind me. I took no notice, thinking the draught from the window was causing the movement, but the next moment a similar movement, barely perceptible, made me shiver unaccountably and disturbingly. I felt so stupid at this that pride prevented my turning round. By now I had located the 2nd bundle of documents and was on the point of picking up the 3rd, when a long, poignant sigh, coming from near my shoulder, made me leap like a madman from my chair and land several feet away. As I leapt, I turned round, my hand on the hilt of my sword, and in truth, if I hadn't felt it at my side, I would have fled like a coward. A tall woman, clad in white, stood looking at me from behind the chair where I had been sitting a moment ago. I almost collapsed with the tremor that passed through me. No one could appreciate that fearful terror unless he had experienced it. The mind grows blank, the heart stands still, the whole body becomes limp as a sponge, as if life itself were ebbing. I don't believe in ghosts, yet I surrendered utterly to a dreadful fear of the dead, and I endured more in those few moments than in the rest of my life, simply from that overwhelming terror of the supernatural. If she hadn't spoken, I think I would have died. But she spoke in a gentle, sad voice that set my nerves tingling. I daren't say I had regained control of myself and come to my senses. No, I was so scared I hardly knew what I was doing. But a certain innate pride, a shred of soldierly instinct, caused me, in spite of myself, to maintain some kind of bold front. I was so scared I hardly knew what I was doing, but a certain innate pride, a shred of soldierly instinct caused me, in spite of myself, to maintain some kind of bold front. I was keeping up appearances to myself, I suppose, and to her, whoever she might be, woman or ghost. It was only afterwards I realized all this, for I can tell you, when the apparition appeared, I thought of nothing. I was afraid. She said, "Oh, monsieur, you can do me a great service." I endeavored to reply, but I couldn't utter a word. Nothing but a vague sound issued from my throat. She went on, "Will you? You can save me, cure me. I am suffering fearfully. I am suffering. Oh, how I suffer." And she sat down slowly in the chair. "Will you?" she asked, regarding me. I signified assent by nodding, for I was still voiceless. Thereupon she held out to me a tortoise-shell comb, and murmured, "Comb my hair. Please comb my hair. That will cure me. It must be combed. Look at my head, how I suffer. My hair burns me so." Her hair, unplaited, was very long and very black. It hung over the back of the chair and reached to the floor. Why did I take that comb with a shudder? Why did I take that long black hair that made my skin creep as if I were handling snakes? I don't know. That feeling has stayed in my fingers to this day, and I still shiver when I think of it. I combed her hair. I handled, I don't know how, those ice-cold tresses. I untangled them, loosened them. She sighed and bowed her head, appeared to be content. All at once she exclaimed, "Thank you," and snatched the comb from my hand and fled through the half-open door. Left to myself, I went through the terrified agitation of a person who wakes from a nightmare. At last I came to my senses. I hastened to the window and with a great effort broke open the shutters, letting in a flood of light. At once I ran to the door through which she had gone. I found it closed and immovable. Then a frantic wish to flee overcame me in the kind of panic soldiers experience in battle. I clutched the 3 bundles of letters on the open bureau, ran from the room, rushed down the stairs 4 at a time, found myself outside, I don't know how, and seeing my horse a few paces away, leaped into the saddle and galloped off. I only halted on reaching Rouen and my own house. Flinging the bridle to my groom, I hurried to my room, where I locked myself in to think. For an hour I speculated anxiously whether I had been the victim of a hallucination. Surely I must have had one of those mysterious nervous shocks, one of those mental disturbances that give rise to miracles, to which the supernatural owes its influence. I was almost convinced I had seen a vision, experienced a hallucination, when I went to the window. I happened to glance at my chest. My military cape was covered with hairs. The long hair of a woman, which had got caught in the buttons. One by one, with trembling fingers, I plucked them off and flung them away. Then I summoned my groom. I was too distressed to go and see my friend that day. Moreover, I wanted to consider more fully what I ought to tell him. I sent him his letters, for which he gave the groom a receipt. He inquired after me very particularly. He was told I was unwell, that I had had sunstroke or some such thing. He appeared to be exceedingly anxious. At daybreak next morning I visited him, determined to tell him the truth. He had gone out on the previous evening and had not yet returned. I called again during the course of the day. My friend was still absent. I waited a whole week. He did not appear. At length I informed the authorities. A search was started, but not the least trace of his whereabouts or the manner of his disappearance was discovered. A thorough examination was made of the derelict chateau. Nothing of a suspicious nature came to light. There was no sign that a woman had been concealed there. The inquiries led to nothing, and the search was abandoned. For more than half a century I have heard nothing. I know no more than before. Good. Bid with confidence.